Thank you, Madam Chair, for calling this hearing, and appreciate the testimony. Just a quick commercial for H.R. 3274, which is the small and medium-sized Export Act of 2008 that several of us have introduced to increase our government's capacity to help small and medium-sized export to China. As I tell folks, whether you love China or hate China, you'll love this bill because this is designed to get our stuff into that market, not the other way around. So people can have any view they want on currency and or subsidies from China and still support H.R. 3274. So I throw that in. I'm also pleased to hear that this hearing is more than just about currency manipulation versus free trade agreements, because it's hardly the debate we ought to be having. And but what I didn't hear more of is the idea of a competitiveness policy and what elements that would take. And for Dr. Chatterjee, I'd ask if you have some thoughts on what it would take to maintain the foundation of competitiveness in this country. So I think what some folks do in Congress or push in Congress on trade, and I've generally been supportive of trade agreements, have been a trade policy, but it's nowhere near a policy to keep us competitive. Can you chat a little bit about that?
Sure. I think it's an excellent question and a point well taken, that we have these conversations in isolation when we should probably be thinking about a competitiveness policy that includes trade, that includes workforce development, that also includes immigration, frankly, one of the most contentious issues, and particularly high-skilled immigration. Around the world, several countries have programs based on a points-based system, so they can bring in high-skilled immigrants for specific jobs. That's been discussed. Bringing in people with specific skills is clearly important. Also, the people we have here on H-1B visas, right? Why shouldn't we be stapling a visa to their diplomas when they do a PhD in an advanced engineering subject? Currently, 50% of engineering graduates, PhD students, are from foreign countries. And increasingly, I'm seeing at Duke University, a generation ago, while my parents from India came here, the Indian students now are saying, we're going to go back to India. We can have a better life in Bangalore than we can here in Durham. To me, that's sort of a tragedy of our immigration system today. They find it to be better going back to India than staying here when they could be producing and contributing to our economy. In addition, we can't forget about investing in the folks who are already here, and science and math education has got to be part of that. American students are lagging behind in those areas. I think there's a lot of scare tactics talking about engineering graduates from China and India. Yeah, there's about 1 million a year in each place, but it's very variable in terms of the skills they actually have. That being said, it's better to sort of be on our guard, even if the threat is not as large. I think we have to take this more seriously, especially among minority students who are lagging behind in these areas. Now, what's that going to take? It's going to take a strong commitment, not just in sort of secondary education, but all the way back to primary education. I don't think American students are challenged enough in the math and sciences at an early age, and it's going to take sort of a reformulation in the way we think about education. That would be the second part of it. So high-skilled immigration is one area, education and workforce development would be the other. The last one is retraining programs. I think we talk a lot about it, but I'm not sure if we're evaluating the way we should. You know, when someone loses their job in the textile industry, for example, in our state, North Carolina, can they be retrained to do something in that industry or in another industry? What kind of guidance have they been given? You know, we've had a good experience in some aspects in North Carolina taking low-end textiles and actually moving up to the higher end, and we've been quite successful in that. How can we retrain folks who used to work at the old textile mill to work in the new one? That's a key issue. I don't think enough attention is being put into those, and your point is well taken. If we could think about those components along with trade policy, we might end up with something better.
Yeah. Mr. French, a question for you. Have you approached or talked to anybody at the Federal Maritime Commission regarding the ocean freight charges issue?
We haven't as a federation at the moment.
Are you planning on that?
I think it's something we need to do.
We have them before the Coast Guard committee at 2 o'clock if you're around this afternoon. I'm sure they'd love to hear from. I'm sure they wouldn't love to hear from you, but we can probably help them hear from you. Just a last general question for the members. If anyone else wants to weigh in on my first question that Dr. Chatterjee responded to. Mr. Griswold.
Yeah, Congressman, I do think that is a very good point, that free trade, as important as it is not a magic bullet, and it's not the single answer. We need to have as good a domestic business climate as possible, and that includes reasonable regulations, reasonable taxation, and I just want to echo what my friend to my left here says about a skilled workforce, and I do think Congress should re-examine the H-1B program. This is important to small business. This just isn't just a Fortune 500 issue. This is important to small business. There was a study at Duke University a year or two ago that found that a quarter of U.S. high-tech and engineering startup companies had a foreign-born person as a co-founder of that. If you want to encourage not just small business entrepreneurism generally, but the high-tech, innovative kind, we need to reform our visa programs. And these companies often have connections abroad that encourage some of our highest value exports to the rest of the world. So it is a package. You make a very good point.
Thank you. Let's go Mr. Weatherington.
Yes.
And Mr. Johnson.
I am a supporter of assistance to help with exports to China. I think it's a marvelous program. I've been a beneficiary, as I've said, of those programs in a number of countries. At the risk of throwing another log on the fire, though, the one fear that I do have that keeps me up at night having a high technology product is that of intellectual property. Fortunately, my sales to China now are below the radar screen. My fear is that with success, I would get to a point where it would become a point of interest. And it's very, very difficult for a small company to be able to deal with that and stay innovative enough to be ahead of the copying.
Yeah, thanks. And Mr. Johnson.
Our members, the concerns they most raise are price of energy, health care, and also taxation. If you're going to have a competitiveness policy, I suggest looking at those. But I don't think you can ignore in a competitiveness policy the fact that the biggest exporters in the world have erected large industrial policies that make their goods, make it difficult for us to compete against their goods. And you can either raise barriers to those goods, you can subsidize the United States industry, which I don't think our country wants to do, or you can go after those subsidies. And until you start going after those subsidies, which are very often WTO illegal and can be gone after, you're going to have our companies competing against state governments. And we can compete against a Chinese textile mill, but what we cannot compete against is the government of China. And that's what is being set up for us. Textile industry is now, in China, has now been gifted with its 11th five-year plan for the textile industry by the Chinese government. There are no plans for the textile industry in the United States, and we don't want them. But we do want a fair playing field where the U.S. government starts going after these 63 subsidies that the Chinese government is offering its domestic manufacturers.
I'm sorry. I'm out of time, so I want to be respectful to the Chairwoman. I want to thank the Chairwoman. And just to remind folks, where I come from, Washington State, we actually have a trade surplus with China. So it kind of depends where you sit sometimes in this country as well about how you approach these things.